Welcome back to the PPC Mastery podcast, everybody. We have a special guest for you today, Kirk Williams. We spoke recently in the PPC Hub, and we thought, hey, why not bring him on the show? So, Kirk, welcome. For those of you who don't know who Kirk Williams is, you're probably living under a rock. But today, I want to talk to you, talk with him about his book, primarily "Stop the Scale: Building a Digital Agency You Actually Like." But he also did a TED Talk recently about creating goals for your business that fit for you as a person and are right for you. But anyway, before I take the words out of your mouth, Kirk, that's what I want to talk to you about today. But thanks for coming on, and I'm super excited for what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I was saying before, I'll chat with you and Bob anytime. So
yeah, man, glad to hear that. So so you did a TED Talk recently, and it's dropping. I think by the time, since it's dropping soon, by the time that this is coming out, it's already out, and we will link it in the show notes. But I think the topic that you spoke about, creating goals for your life, setting goals for your life that fit your personality and your own personal desires. I think that's really crucial, and I would love to hear you talk about that, because it really triggered something in me when you explained it when we were talking in the PPC Hub, and it helped me rethink certain decisions and redefine what I want to do in my life and my business. And I also spoke about it with friends. And I have a few friends that are kind of stuck in their work, in their career. And right after we did the interview with you, you kind of triggered me to do a life audit, so to speak. So I just asked myself questions like, okay, where am I right now? Where do I want to go? What fits me? What do I like? What do I dislike, etc. And then I spoke to my friends about that I did that, and they're like, oh man, that's really cool. So I would love to hear from you, because I think those things are really impactful. And sure, we can talk about PPC and tactics and strategies, but I think it's these types of things that help you take a step back to reevaluate everything in your life that is the most meaningful and impactful on the long term for you as a person. So I would love to hear from your perspective, what was the TED Talk about, and why did you decide to do a TED Talk about that topic?
yeah, definitely. So yeah, it should be dropping any day now, actually. So I'm excited when it does. So and I have to know it is TEDx, not TED. So there is a difference. They tell us that we're supposed to make sure to note that. So there you go. Right. I did my legal duty.
There's a disclaimer.
And noted that I did the disclaimer, right? Yeah, I mean, so I spoke on success, like business success, and specifically contrasting what I have often seen is business success, which is often revenue tied. So like when you talk about success, when anyone talks about success, and I love asking this online, just like, well, what do you mean by successful, right? Because it's almost like there's this massive assumption that everyone makes whenever they're like, there were 20 successful people over there. And you're like, well, like, what does that even mean, right? And almost every time, I think even without the speaker realizing it, they are talking something to do with money. Like it is tied to wealth. It is tied to money. It is tied to revenue. And that's really interesting because let's start pulling on that thread. Like how much money? Like what level of money is successful? Because even the difference between, if you are like, let's just say it's a monetary number. If you're successful in the Philippines, that looks very different than if you're successful in Silicon Valley, right? Those two numbers, just being able to rent an apartment in a place like Silicon Valley, right? You wouldn't be able to survive on the successful income of someone in a different country and all that stuff, right? So even then, there's just like, to me, there's just like problems with that, even just at a practical level. But overall, you start pulling on that revenue thread even more, and you start to see things like, okay, like how many people who have attained money, and sometimes like status is included in there too. So I tied that, like wealth and status and that. Okay, so many people who have attained that are actually like content and happy. And a lot of times you'll see doses of happiness, but certainly not all all the time. And then I quoted a few people, like Jim Carrey has a kind of a famous quote where he basically is like, I wish everyone could get rich and famous and get everything they ever dreamed for so they can see that's not the answer, right? And that's often why you do see like highly depressed people who have attained a lot. And part of that is because they've actually attained that material possession, those material possessions, and realized like, wow, that actually, like there's something more, right? So I think it was kind of like over years and years of kind of thinking through all that stuff and then starting my own business. Some of that for me with starting my own business, and I admit this, is like I've no idea what I'm doing. I have a little bit more idea now that I'm 12 years in, but especially when I started, no idea what I'm doing, right? And so I think that actually impacted the way I measure success, because I didn't even know how, I didn't even have a lot of those tools to know how to attain just like significant growth, money growth sort of things. So for me, it was almost like clarity from day one of like, what am I trying to do? I'm just not trying to get as rich as possible. I'm trying to like, I'm trying to have build a family, trying to be content in my lifestyle and my family and those sort of things. And I would like to do that in a way that allows me to pursue that. So, so the 3 points of success. So basically my TEDx talk was, okay, so that actually is probably longer than the actual intro in my TEDx talk. But like the TEDx talk was basically like, okay, I don't think success should be money-based. So like I would submit these 3 things. And that is, and specifically I'm thinking business ownership, but I think a lot of these things do transfer into other areas of our life. So what does success in your business look like? I think it's at least these 3 things. Like, are you achieving the purpose for which your business exists? So for me, I'm a Google Ads agency owner. Like the purpose for which my business exists is to provide really great Google Ads services for our clients. I want to make sure I'm doing that well. So to me, like, part of the definition of success is if I'm not doing that well. So even if I'm wealthy, like let's say I've lied to a whole lot of clients, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm really good at selling, and I actually have a lot of money in the bank, I would suggest that that person is not actually successful, especially long-term, because they're not actually like achieving their business purpose. And I think long-term that would show up, right? Enough of those clients would eventually see like that struggle would be there. But in that way, like you're not a Google Ads agency then, right? So I think that's kind of an important aspect. And then sustainability, I do think, is part of that. So I know like money's not everything for success, but money is not nothing. The double negative there. Yeah. Like you do need some form of like profitability and like that. So like that does need to be part of it, but not just profitability, even just sustainability in other ways too. Like a business needs to think of ways that, especially in its local community, in its local context, what are ways that your business could fail and how do you guard against that? So that's kind of looking at, yeah, we actually do need to make sure our business is financially tenable and is able to do that too, right? So I do think that's a mark of success. And then the third one was, does your business as a business owner, does it allow you to pursue your own mental wellness? And then I tacked in those like employees and even family members around, because a lot of times what I've heard over the years for business owners is just kind of this like, yeah, well, I powered through for 20 years and just sacrificed everything, my family, everything, just so eventually I could have that payday. I mean, you're not guaranteed that you'll even make it to retirement, right? But at what cost did you sacrifice all, like your own health? That could be physical health, that could be mental health. There's a whole lot of aspects around that, because if you talk to the majority of people over the age of 60, this is very anecdotal, but if you talk to the majority of people over the age of 60, a huge part of what they talk about is their family and relationships, and a lot of times there's regret. Or there's there's happiness where they look at that, because as you get older, you just start to, as like your time begins to shrink with what you have left, you do start to think through like what's actually important, right? And so I just kind of tied all that in. I had some different stories and stuff, especially like my grandpa was a crucial part of my kind of thinking with that, and just tied in some of that stuff just to point people to, hey, pursue those 3 things rather than scaling your business as aggressively as possible. Yeah. And I think then you're successful. So
And so could you maybe talk about that, about your grandfather? Because that sounds like that is one of the most, if you want to at least, that sounds like that is one of the most important pieces here. Because I'm actually curious where this came from for you, because it sounds like this is something that you have been thinking about and observing from the start of your career, as I hear it from you now. And I think from what I know about you now, since we've spoken a couple of times, so, you seem to me like you're a really observant type of guy, and analytical, and you oversee things on the philosophical side. But what is that? Yeah, where does that come from? And maybe like that story with your grandfather, because I'm really curious. Like, is that something that was already there from the start, or is it something that developed over time? What is that for you?
I was laughing when you said that because this is on my desk. So one of my employees as a funny gift got this for me, and it's
Nice.
this little plaque that says the boss, which is kind of funny because that's not really how we roll, but it says the boss, chief ponderer and overthinker.
There you go.
Yes. Yes, it's a joke because it can get in the way of us sometimes, where it's like, all right, Kirk, let's make a decision and stop thinking, right? Yeah, I mean, I think, as with all of us, there's going to be a whole lot of influences that eventually you find yourself looking back on this path that you're on, and you're like, whoa, how did I get there? More often than not, it's not one or two things, right? It's just a whole lot of little things that kind of guide you along these paths of life. And so for me, like probably the top ones would be like, I'm trying to think. It's interesting. I don't know if I've ever really thought it specifically about that, but probably some of the top ones would be like my location, my location, my lack of experience, my faith, my family, that sort of thing. Those kind of all impact this. So location, this is kind of interesting because I am a Midwest US guy through and through. I mean, I've lived all my life in the Midwest, aside from moving to Montana about 10 years ago, which kind of is almost like the Midwest West, because basically everyone who lives in Montana moved here from the Midwest. So the Montana is Midwesterners who want less people around. That's basically Montana. And so some of that is, and then so my grandpa would be a part of that, like my parents, all that. I grew up in a small town. So I think there's this aspect of small town local community that a lot of times, especially young people, can want to flee, and because they want the excitement of the bigger city, that sort of thing. And there's something interesting about the local community that is really, there's a lot of healthy aspects of that. And so I think there's just some where I was aware of that, like it was maybe ingrained in me more than I realized. And just like some examples would be things like especially back in the day when things were just not so commoditized and just spread everywhere, right? When it wasn't just the case where you could buy an avocado during the winter because they ship avocados from somewhere in the world that grows them. I don't even know where, right? That's just not the way the world used to work. And so you were far more dependent on your local community and your neighbors for your actual life. It wasn't just a convenience thing. It was like, you knew that you had to interact well with that guy over there, because when your cows got out, he was going to come help you mend your fence, and you were going to go help him mend his fence, or whatever it might be, and you would be interacting with each other. Your kids were in school, that sort of thing. And I think there's something about a local community that fosters that I think has been lost. So I think there's some level of kind of being, and so especially in those sort of communities, you see a lot of, I don't know how to say it, you see just a lot of like contentment and peace. Not always. Okay. So I'm painting in broad brush. But a lot of times, people are, that's why a lot of times, small communities, small towns are often seen as boring for, young people who want excitement, want stuff. That's because over time, it's kind of that's not a bug. That's a feature, right? Of that is there's this level where people have realized, man, I can sit around, drink tea on my porch, watch the sunset, and that's a pretty relaxing way to live my life. And even if I don't have as much money as if I moved to the city over there, but then I'd be dealing with the hustle and bustle and the traffic and the stress and the burnout, right? And so I think that all that to say, I think there's pros and cons of everything, but all that to say, that's some of probably the influence is like I actually grew up in that. So I experienced that and felt that a little bit. And then kind of shifting more into that busyness mindset and kind of always in the back of my mind, having this level of like almost this like semi yearning for that mentality, I think is part of that. So that's part of it. I think my faith works into that, like how I view the world, how I view, I think I do think that there is a God who has created all of us, right? That we have a relationship. We have to figure that out. And that does influence specifically the way I interact with other people. And like, that's not just a throwaway phrase. There is some level where if I think, like if Jesus tells me, hey, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, like treat Miles like I would want Miles to treat me, right? Pretty practical. A lot of religions have that sort of mentality, right? But like that weighs into as I'm thinking, hey, how should I build my business? Because then I'm thinking specifically how, like my I just had a client, I'm not making this up. I just had a client email me this morning and say, hey, we're struggling a little bit with our finance stuff right now. We're just in this tough week as I think like buying stuff for Black Friday, that sort of thing. Can you push our fee? Their fee is due today. Like, can you push that back, till Friday? I mean, hesitate. Absolutely. No problem. Yeah. Sure. Like kind of one of those things of just like, yeah, why wouldn't I? Right. That's what I would want to be treated where I am in that circumstance. So I think it's just the way that I think I do try to act that way towards my clients. Like, how would I want an agency to manage my ad campaigns? And then same with my employees. And I will say, and this is where it starts to get into the practical stuff, is like that has limited our growth. Absolutely. That mindset has limited our growth because I do try to be fairly generous with how I act towards our employees and clients. And absolutely, that's limited our ability to be quite as profitable as we could and take on that next employee or something like that, because I'm a little bit more risk averse because of that. Because, hey, I wouldn't want to be laid off because my boss made maybe a decision that was a little bit more growth focused and it ended up not working out. So I'd like to be a little more careful saving things like that. I'll stop talking and let you get another question. But I think all of that is part of what weighs into this. And then finally, maybe the third quick puzzle piece too would be just witnessing agency burnout, because I was not part of an agency. Before this, I was just working in-house as a PPCer. And so then all of a sudden I start this like consulting thing. Now I'm like hiring people. And again, like I just have no concept for agencies. And as I've gone over the years, I've realized how much of a known thing agency burnout is. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying before with like employees, stuff like that. I think that's part of increasing where I was just like, I think this is just stupid. You just have people, and not everyone. So I'm painting broad brush, but typically I think burnout comes from a place. And I do think part of where that place can come from is an obsession with scaling so rapidly that you take on clients you probably shouldn't take on for whatever reason. And then that impacts how the employees, like what they have to deal with, what the crap that sometimes they have to deal with these employees, stuff like that. And it's because you're trying to grow, but then like your employees are stressed, burned out, that sort of thing. I think all of that was part of this thing of just like, I just don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So that's where it came from.
Yeah, that's great, man. And keep going for sure. Like I can listen to this for a long time. But so I totally agree that agency burnout is real. And especially in PPC, it's all changing so fast, and there's different reasons why I think people can potentially struggle with mental wellness, and especially now around Black Friday. It's the busiest month of the year if you're in e-commerce. If you're not working with the right clients, they might demand a lot of you, and if there's not enough communication there, that might cause issues. If you're working at an agency and your manager is not really looking out for you, there's different reasons why you can burn out. And I think that people are definitely not talking about this enough, especially from the male perspective. I do think that women often talk about these things more naturally and easier, but I think especially for men, it's definitely, and that's also painting in broad brush, as you said. But I think with men, it's so important to always be open and talk about these things and not just rough through, you know, like, because at some point, if you're really like at your tax, at your limit, then the burnout is going to kick in so much harder. So I think that's really crucial to you know, bring awareness to it and talk about. And I think your approach to building your business is already the biggest thing that you can do to sort of limit that in how that happens for you, whether you burn out or your employee or the people that work for you, work with you in Zato. Because if you can build a nice environment where people feel appreciated and happy to work, and you're working with nice clients, then I think you're already ahead of that moment where you can really burn out. And burnout can happen in any time, any moment, because there's more factors that play into this than just work.
Absolutely.
But I do think that the way that you're building Zato is a really healthy environment from what it sounds like. And could you maybe talk about a bit about you know, the goals that you set? Maybe not, doesn't necessarily have to be granular, but the things that you remind yourself of when you're building your business. Because here's maybe another sort of follow-up question. Do you ever, because it sounds like you have it figured out, like, or maybe not, that's not the word, not figured out, but like you have a good vision of how you want your business and life to be. But do you ever feel as though you're a little bit off the track, or you're chasing goals that you realize all of a sudden, like, hey, what am I actually doing? Because you know that you mentioned that you're definitely not into maximizing profit or revenue at all costs. But do you keep reminding yourself of that, or are there ever moments where you sort of get off the track, or what do you do in those instances?
Yes. Let me think of how best to go at that. You know, when I think of let's say our goals, my goals, the business goals, it's funny, even as you're saying that, I was starting to think. At first I thought, I don't really have goals. And then I was like, well, that's not true, because kind of like what I've already been talking about in some ways is like a picture of goals. And so maybe like my goals are not really like, here's what I'm trying to do with my agency. So my objective is to be at 8 figures in 5 years, and then, whatever. So many times those are what we think of goals, which again tend to be monetary based, right? I almost think that my goals are like life goals and character goals and philosophy goals, right? Kind of going back to what I was talking about before. I mean, I look at, I forgot to mention, like I have a family. So I have 6 kids, right? There's 8 people in my family. There's 7 other people in my life that I need to invest in. And so again, like, that's not everyone. And that means people who don't have that have an advantage in business over me. Truly.
Fair enough.
And I'm okay with that, because again, like, my life goal isn't primarily to make Zato turn into some large thing. Like a part of my life goal is to like build into my kids and make sure that I'm investing time with my wife and investing time in my marriage, stuff like that, right? And so those sort of things, and then just character goals, right? Like I'm trying to become a better person. I'm in active therapy. I read books all the time on like emotional intelligence and like growing that sort of thing, processing things, like probably like all of us should do. Like, here's things that happened in my childhood. How did that work into what I do? How do I need to kind of change how I think, right? That's just like that's not really unique to me, even though some of my things, like I have OCD, right? Some of those things might be unique to me, but everyone has their unique things. And so to me, I look at all of that and say, like, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to be a better person. I'm trying to spend time with my family. I'm trying to like make sure that my employees are able to do those things with their people. I'm trying to make sure that our clients are happy. And like I said, that we're achieving our business purpose. If I want to be true to my word. So if that means that I need to keep learning, if that means I need to keep learning GA4, right? So that we can continue to give excellent PPC services to our clients. Like, I'm going to do that, right? So I think that's where I look at all of that stuff. And like, that's what I'm aiming at. And I think like the business kind of comes along with that in some ways. Yeah, you asked like, what do you do as you get off, sometimes off those goals? Absolutely. There are times where I'll notice, like, again, for me, it tends to be more personal. But yeah, there might be, like, let's say business related, there might be times where I'm thinking, man, I think that demand gen campaigns are coming out, right, in Google Ads. So demand gen campaigns are coming out, and so hey, we really we really need to make sure we're keeping up with that. So maybe we need to kind of reset and rethink as a company, and take some specific time next week to like dig into demand gen together and do that sort of thing. I don't know. That might have been a bad example, but just trying to stay up more on where I'm off on those personal things, the business things, and then adjust as I go. And some of those being on the character side, like I can tell. And this helps to have, like, my wife is like very helpful with feedback, right? She's very willing to communicate. And like she owns a photography business. And so we communicate with each other a lot on this stuff, of just like, hey, maybe we're starting to get a little bit too focused on the business stuff. Maybe like next week, really, we need to pull back and shift and make sure we're doing some stuff with the kids. Or there'll be a time, my wife's October is very photography focused. My November is very Zato focused because of e-commerce. We're very e-commerce heavy, right? So we kind of know that, and we kind of adjust our active, if you will, personal goals around those shifting seasons as well together. So I don't, I'm not sure if that's overly helpful, but
do you talk about, so you and your wife talk about that frequently? Because it sounds to me like you're often taking a step back to oversee, like, okay, what's the direction that we're going into, and where we're headed, and what lies behind us. So I think that's crucial, that piece of communication, especially as you start to have if you have a family, or you start to build one. I can imagine that at this point, since you're in business for such a long time, that it becomes second nature. But do you have any systems in place to help you, remind you of those things that are important to you, or is it all in your head at this point, or what does that look like for you?
I don't think I'm very good at the goal, at that. I don't think I'm great at systems for, hey, let's remember to keep, to get what you said before, about what you do. I'm like, man, I should probably do something like that, like your life audit, right? Maybe a helpful time is New Year's, right? A lot of times New Year's resolutions get this negative hit, but I think kind of like what we're talking about, rather than look at resolutions as, here are all these promises I'm going to break to myself, maybe that's a great time for us just naturally as a people to be like, hey, let's just revisit, like, where was my focus this year? What do I want to do? Like, where am I in life? Like, let me be present right now. That's a big part of it. Like, let me be very present right now. The more that I just sit and I'm present and realize, I think that helps me very much clarify exactly what's important to me right now and what I need to be doing. And so sometimes that might be as simple as, like, literally taking a day off so that you can actually mentally relax and maybe be a little bit more focused. So I have a team member here, Eric. He's he's kind of the director of PPC that is directly over account managers. He and I sometimes will go on like a 14-mile hike on the mountains, and just talk about more of the general, like, business goal stuff like that. And we don't, like, there's usually like 3 things I'll write down that I want to chat with, but it's kind of one of those, like, wherever the conversation takes us. And every single time we come back, there's just some clarity of something bigger maybe in the business that hadn't thought of before, right? We have mental health days for our employees for something similar. So every month, this is in addition to PTO and all that stuff, like every month we have a mental health day.
What's PTO?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Paid time off.
Oh, okay. Yeah, got
Yeah,
it.
I'm glad you asked. Yeah. And it is funny, like, yeah, everywhere in the US does paid time off better. Or I'm sorry, everywhere in the world does paid time off better than the USA.
Yeah, absolutely.
But one of the ways I try to combat that as a US business owner is to actively work in at least another 12 days a year, where it's kind of this, like, I kind of tell them, like, it's kind of this forced, like, I force them to be mentally relaxed.
Yeah,
And what I mean by that is, like, this is as if you're coming, this is as if you're sitting down at your desk in your house or coming into the office, where it's a work day, like, this is not the day to go and get all those errands off that, whatever that you want to do. This is a work day, which means whatever will make you mentally healthy, like whatever will de-stress you just a little bit, whatever that might be, that's what you should do today. And so some people do get some of those errands done because they're like they have this weight lifted, like, got the laundry done, like, yeah, like, watch some TV while I got the laundry done. Man, that is literally the best gift they could get. Or they just go sit in the coffee shop and read a book. So I have, one of the guys, I think he went on like a 20-mile run in the mountains. It was like, all right, you do you. But again, yeah, so all that to say, I think there are probably ways that you can plan in some of those things into your organization for even your employees to do too. So that'll help them, because that's just going to help your organization, for everyone to have a better focus of what their character and purpose is, and that. But yeah, some of those things for me. So
yeah, I that's the probably the number one golden nugget that I got from that book. It is that mental health day, which I think is so crucial. And everybody that I talk about, when I mention, hey, you should read this book, that's usually the number one thing that I explain, because it's so, yeah, it is really unique, man. Like, I don't know what's the average amount of paid days off that you get in the US. Let's say, what's average? 15 or so per year? 10?
I don't know, probably.
Yeah, it's super
it gets a
low.
little tricky because you have like some holidays and things like
Right.
that too that work
But
into it.
yeah, but that's still like in the Netherlands, I think it's around anywhere between 25 and 30 per year is normal. I think the legal minimum is like 20 or so, but usually it's like 25 to 30, and then there's the public holidays as well on top of that. But I always remember that in the US, it's so much more hardcore. So if you offer your employees 1 day off per month to focus on mental health, it is really huge. And I can imagine that's also one of the reasons why people tend to stay with you for a long time, because that would signal to me that you, as my employer, are really looking out for me, because you don't have to do that. You don't have to give them that day. But that is beneficial for that person. It's beneficial for Zato, for the whole ecosystem. So yeah, that's really unique, and I don't think you should underestimate how big it is that you're doing that, especially since you're from the US, where it is so hardcore on the grind and stuff like that. So yeah, that's probably the number one thing that I remembered. But so here's a question. So I can understand that some people, they might think to themselves like, yeah, okay, Kirk, you've built this nice agency, Zato, it's fits well within your life and your goals, well, yada yada yada. But for you, it's easy. But we're just launching, and we need to get money in order to survive. What can you generally say to people in those situations?
Yeah, so I referenced this in my TEDx talk.
Nice.
No, so that's where I think my 3 principles of success still hold up. So are you achieving your business purpose? Are you sustainable? Are you free to pursue mental wellness? One of the things I know, almost this caveat, is I don't think this means there are not going to be times. I have a bad habit of using double negatives. I do think there are times. I do think there are times, especially early on in a business, where pushing through in a sprint is going to be important, is just something that has to be done, right? I actually, in my TEDx talk, I shared an example of a time in my life and in my business where things were just really hard, and I just kind of had to show up to the office and grind. But I think it's really important to see those as the exceptions rather than the rule. And so it might be kind of one of these like, and maybe that's part of what you do, where like we're counting the costs, right? Where you look at something, you're like, hey, if we've done some projections, like this fits into everything of what we're talking about. I think if we put a year into this, we really work hard. We're really, we're excited. I remember the early days of business. Like it was mentally healthy for me to like, to work long hours and write blog posts that I was excited about. I get it. Like that's, so again, like I think it's really important to note that stuff. And that's also why I tried not to put my own stuff too much into those 3 business success principles. Because we're all going to be different. We all have, different levels of bandwidth and all that stuff. But I really do think that it's important to look to be able to look past that long term and say, okay, if we power through and do this for a year or 6 months or whatever, the problem is what happens if you start like making those sacrifices on your health and your time and your family and stuff for 3 years, for 5 years, right? I think that's where you might need to kind of start thinking that. But even then, like the free to pursue wellness. I think I said mental wellness before, and I just meant like wellness, because I think that includes like physical and spiritual and mental and all that stuff, right? Community. And I do think that it's still really important to work that into the equation as you're considering whatever X move would be. And that's like, if your physical body and your mental body and your family, if everything is going to take a hit for like an entire year, is starting that business truly worth that cost? Or is there another way? Like what are, and this is where to me, it's just one of those, like, let's stop assuming that it is, and let's start getting, because people are amazing and creative and innovative. So like, what are some other ways that we could do that? And again, like, I would be very surprised if one of the ways isn't to back off of those projections, maybe not take that outside funding where all that pressure is coming from. Because if you actually start, gosh, maybe the pressure on you to sacrifice all that stuff, maybe that's from the outside funding, and it's not actually what you're interested in doing, because you could grow your business, to 200,000 the first year instead of $1 million by not doing that outside funding. And you've done this cool bootstrap thing. You had the time to spend with your family. You're still figuring it out, and it's slower than you wanted, but also like you're still living your life and you're still building a thing. You just haven't scaled up dramatically, which, by the way, as soon as you start taking outside funding, you're starting, like, the amount of money you're getting from that actually starts to decrease so much too. Talk to founders who have sold, especially those who have given away a lot. And by the time they actually get their payday, sometimes it's pretty shocking how little they actually get for the amount of sacrifice they and everyone else put in, rather than if they just slowed it down and bootstrapped it the whole way. Right. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I think there's just a lot to think about there. But I'm not saying, I think it's helpful to clarify those things. Like, I'm not saying that you'll never have to work hard or long hours ever. I just think it's you can just weigh the costs and ensure that that's an exception rather than a rule thing. I'm also not saying that you should never grow. I don't think that's true. I think it's more of this, like, this kind of scaling rapidly at the expense of everything in you and around you and everything. That seems to be almost this accepted cultural thing increasingly that I just disagree with.
Yeah, and then it comes down to what's important to you as a person. Because I know, do you know who Alex Hormozi is?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I can imagine that when I look at his content, I love what he's doing, and he has a lot of good things to share. But he also says that he loves to just work all day, every day. And he met his wife, and they married with, like, sort of, they discussed together, like, yeah, we want to build this big business together. So they're in it for the business. So, I can imagine when people look at him, they're like, yeah, I also work hard and I grind and all that stuff. And for him, that's perfect, because that's exactly what he wants. But I think then, as you look at it for yourself, for a lot of people, that might cause additional stress because you think like, oh man, I wish I was able to work 14 hours per day, 6 days per week, but I can't. And that's giving me additional stress. So then it comes back to, what fits you and your personal goals. And I think then you need to constantly remind yourself of, what you want to get out of life and what your own limitations are. And I know for a fact he doesn't have kids, so it's different than, for example, you, if you have 6 kids. It's a totally different scenario.
The only thing I'll note, like,
yeah, go ahead.
I agree in large part, but then the only thing I'll note on that is I think that sometimes so I just listened to a podcast episode called "If," the podcast is "If Books Could Kill." I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's two people. They're pretty funny. They talk about like popular airport type books, and they kind of go through them and like kind of tear them apart, right? Probably not everything they say is accurate, but they have a lot of good things that they're questioning these books. And one of the ones they looked at was Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek, and to me, Tim Ferriss is like Alex that you mentioned in terms of, back in the day, Tim was like the guy everyone wanted to build the business like Tim, the 4-Hour Workweek, and he's talking about like grinding and doing all this stuff so that you have the freedom to this is what they were joking about, so that you have freedom to like hire cheap labor that they'll grind so that you don't have to. That seems to be one of the tenets of it. But anyways, what they're laughing about is like, since then, years later, whatever, he's like, he's basically been like, yeah, I burned out. And like, he's like, yeah, I burned out. And now he's like, talks about almost like, I hate to say it like this. I don't know this too well, so I'm not trying to knock the guy, but it's almost like now he was a guru of like burnout, and now he's like a guru of like health and wellness and stuff like that. And it was almost like, man, maybe you should have had a little bit of the health and wellness stuff in the beginning part. So that's the only concern I have, is sometimes people are like, oh yeah, no, I get it, Kirk, but I'm super excited, I'm pumped, and like we're gonna go and we're gonna build this thing because that's what I'm excited about. And you're like, yeah, you actually might be burning yourself out now without realizing it. Yeah. So you actually maybe still need to be a little careful of that, because I'm almost willing to bet like $20 that in 5 years, Ramosi is, now talking about burnout culture and how he did that burnout culture.
Yeah, it could very well be.
But anyways, I don't know that.
Yeah, no, and I think everybody has their own limits, and sometimes you have to discover what those limits are, and you can only discover by going over those limits. And then you're in retrospect, you're like, oh, maybe I should have done that a bit differently. Now I'm gonna, be a bit more nuanced in how I talk about certain things. So how important are and this is probably the last like bigger thing that we can talk about for the next 5-6 minutes or so, is how important are the ideal clients for you? Because if you look at your agency, you want to build it in a specific way, and you do value mental wellness or wellness in general, how important is your ideal client type, and what do you do to make sure or at least increase the chances that you hire the right clients instead of the wrong ones? So I think that's incredibly important for people, and it also goes back to the example of, but I need money to grow, and I need money to survive, blah blah blah. I do think that people, especially in PPC, if you get a lead, everybody's just happy that they got a new client, whereas you should probably be a bit more strict in who you work with and if it's a match. So I'm just curious, like what's your approach to that?
Yes, I'm so glad you brought this up, because actually I was thinking about this earlier with even in the goals part of it. It didn't quite fit there, but it kind of did. And so I'm really glad we're talking about that, because I think this is such a crucial part to all this. And the reason I say that is because, what you asked before is, well, how do you, sometimes do you get off your goals, that sort of thing? And what I'd forgotten to note is, every once in a while, yes, when we take on a client we shouldn't have taken on. And that is actually always this like reminder of that. Like it's almost this, it like reminds us to reflect on what are we trying to do, and then how do we get back to that. So anyways, as we just kind of think about clients, I think this is such a crucial part, at least for service businesses. And the way we look at it is we have certain things that I would say are like these core boundaries where I would rather shut the business down than deal with certain client situations. And so that really helps. That's going to be different for me than it is for other people. But I think it's really helpful to kind of start to determine like, what are those boundaries for you? And then what is some of the other stuff where it's like preferences or like, this is how you would like to do it. But then in tough times, maybe you sacrifice from some of those other things. Because when the tough times come, and this is, I think, where it's really important, when the tough times come, I still think that you have to stick to those core boundaries. Otherwise, then that's where all of the other stuff, like the burnout and this, all of that other stuff that you started the business to get away from in the first place, or whatever your goals are. Once those are starting to be sacrificed, like, you're not achieving that purpose. So why are you doing that? So navigating those core boundaries. So we just, as an agency, between like 2023, we're all going to look back on 2023 in like years as kind of the year that we all knew, as we look back with 2020 vision, that like it just decimated marketing agencies. But like, we're in it right now, and there's still not a ton of people talking about it. I just saw Rand Fishkin post a little video last week about this, which was super interesting. 2023. So this is like, as I talk to friends who are business agency owners, large agencies, small agencies. Large agencies tended just to lay off people. Small agencies, mid-sized agencies either laid off or closed. There was just it's been overall fairly difficult overall in the economic framework as it gets to agencies. We lost 43% of our revenue in July and August of this year. This is part of how I try to run the business, try to have money in the bank for difficult times, try to just have some ability to be able to navigate difficult times. And yet, when you lose almost half of your revenue, there's some level of like, okay, how long can we do this? Right.
Yeah.
We have in the last, I should look just to see, I think in the last 35 to 40 days now from time of recording this, we've gained probably 60% of our revenue. We've grown because we needed to replace basically all of that. And then we actually landed a few more clients on top of that as well. We're not a large agency. Mm-hmm. So all that to say, the reason I say that is just like, we literally just came out of a time where I was asking these questions in very, very real time. So this is not ideology here. Yeah, I'm having these internal conversations a month ago. And that is, we just get this lead. Should we pursue it or not? Even though we're looking at our bank account, we're like, I'd really like to pursue this, so we could recover some of that lost revenue, right? Mm-hmm. And to me, that's where you start looking at your core boundaries. And there were times where we looked at someone, I said, they are the type of client that if we would land them, I would rather have us eventually go out of business than have them as a client, because of some of these core boundaries. So some of those for us would be things like if they are abusive to our account managers, verbally, that typically is what you see with agencies, especially distributed. So especially verbally, I just don't put up with that. Like if we have someone, like, we'll always treat you with respect. We expect that as well. If we're just in the sales process and we're just getting complete disrespect, negativity, criticism, stuff like that, that's just we're out. It's stuff like that. So then we have more of on top of that, so we have kind of those core boundaries that we know. And then on top of that, then we have more of this would be ideal. And in more difficult times, we're a little more likely to take risks on the ideal boundaries than normal. So in a really awesome time, so right now, we're basically, like I said, we're basically maxed out with bandwidth at this point. I just sent a lead this morning, just letting them know, hey, you can join our wait list, but can't take you on. When that comes, then like we raise the level of who we want to work with, kind of those boundary filtering. We raise that pretty high, where we're just looking like, we just really, if we do get to a point where, we have some bandwidth that opens up, then we're looking at like, we want to find the client that is just, we mesh in every possible way. And some of that for us is things like, how do they view growth, long-term growth? Does their philosophy align with how we think? If someone tells us we want to grow 200% in the next 3 months, that's a huge red flag for us, because I don't even think it's typically not even possible. But also, like, that might not be a great fit for us. If someone, I'm trying to think off the top of my head what some of the others are like that. If someone's in an industry that's not typically one where we have a lot of experience, again, that might be one where we'll just let them know, we don't have a ton of experience in this, but we think we can do well with you if we want to. Otherwise, we might just, pass on them in a better time. Things like that are more of examples where we're looking at who will be a great fit for us and will work well within us. Because again, that goes into all of the philosophy stuff, like the way we do communication is kind of different. Part of avoiding agency burnout is like our team basically doesn't work nights and weekends, which is fairly rare in agency life. And again, like that's typically something that we're looking for, just ensuring that we're aligned with that. If someone wants us to be on hand 24/7, that's not going to be a fit with our business philosophy. I'm not even saying that's wrong of them to want that. I'm saying I know that we're not going to be a good fit because of that. And so I think those are all ways that we try to look with. So all that to say, then as you're building this business that aligns with who you are and your goals, as you're able to find those clients, then you can bring in those who are more aligned with you, so that you can continue with your purpose and goals. If you're just constantly aligning with clients or business partners who are not aligned with your goals, right? You're literally not going in the same direction, and you're just going to have constant frustration as you're doing that. And the last thing I'll note, because someone might be listening to this and they're kind of like, okay, well, gee, must be nice to be able to pick the clients you work with, right? Because again, that's where you limit growth. And to me, that's where then maybe the thing to do on there is just like, we just really try to lean into marketing and sales really well with content and things like that. So that we have the ability to get those leads and be picky. So that's a lot of times where I've done a ton of work over the years on that side, on content and stuff like that, to build that inbound flywheel. And actually, that's a crucial part of it. Like, you'll be able to be more picky on clients if you have the leads coming in. So.
Yeah, and then that's actually I think we can go again for another hour in another episode. But that was definitely something that I also wrote down. Like we could talk about that in the future, about the impact of your personal brand on being able to build your business around your life. Because I do agree that, as you said, through that you are much more able to say no and cherry pick between specific clients. If you have leads coming in, because especially when it's inbound, then people will already it's sort of a pre-filter, because you're not reaching out to them, they're reaching out to you, and you can check them, and they already know that they want to work with you, so they probably know a little bit about you and your approach to business. So I'm sure that has a big impact on that as well. But that's something for a future episode. I think we can round it off here. So this was really nice, man. Like I said, I really enjoy talking to you about these things, and I don't think we spoke much about PPC once again, and I think that's actually really cool, because these are really important topics for people at agencies, freelancers, in-house as well. If you're just in your career, it doesn't really matter. You always have to be centered around what you want to take from life and what you want to give to people. So the last note is maybe what's next for you, and how can people connect with you?
What's next? For the most part, just doing the same old, like just keeping on doing what I'm doing. However, one thing, so every year I've been trying to do some like major content thing.
Yeah.
So it's either a course I put out or a book, or, this past year it was TEDx. That was actually a ton of work. Next year, my goal is to totally overhaul my PPC Ponderings book and do like a revised version of that. There's just stuff in there that's outdated, even though it's 4 years old, which in PPC world is pretty old. So I just want to go through that and totally overhaul it. Maybe take out a chapter, maybe add a chapter, rewrite stuff. So that's probably going to be my big project this coming year is try to really update that and get that back into 2024 mode. So as far as online, where to find me, I'm PPC Kirk pretty much everywhere. And Zato, Z-A-T-O. Zato is my business, zatomarketing.com. So.
All right, great. Well, thanks, Kirk. And thanks everyone for listening. And we'll catch you on the next episode.
Thank you.